An epilogue, the ending of a book where the writer writes the comments of all that's happened throughout the writing. Well, this is where we're at in the Gospel of John. One hope we have made it over a year and 1 week of doing the book of John. What an incredible gospel. I pray that you would have found this very helpful in your walk with the Lord and find this as the, the very loving and emotional book that it is. One thing that I would like to mention is that you can always go back and re-listen to some of the messages to just get a handle on things. Maybe you might be personally going through the book of John, and one of the things that you can do is go back and just really listen to a sermon and gain some thoughts as you work through the gospel yourself. So I just want to encourage you to do that, as it's been a lot. You might forget pieces and different things like that. But yeah, we are here at the end. One of the things that I like about coming to an end of a book is that we can wrap up what we've seen throughout the writing. We could wrap up this main idea in which the writer was trying to portray, and we here have the opportunity to do that, to look back and see, what did this book really teach us? Well, I think this book really taught us the message of the gospel through the life and ministry of Jesus Christ. The Gospel of John really gives us a picture of Jesus' earthly ministry, and it wraps up by his return after he is risen from the dead. And the 21st chapter here really gives us an insight of things that were happening, what was going on during the time as Jesus came back from the dead. Well, here's the deal. I want us to lock in on two specific things that I think is an image of what happened prior in this gospel and other gospels of Jesus and telling us about Jesus' ministry. I think Jesus did these things intentionally to tell us a little bit about the story he is trying to portray to us as human beings. I think we pick up on an image that Jesus is trying to show us. He's trying to show us this image, and I think this image is to help us as we live the Christian faith. As we continue to walk and live life as believers, this image in which Jesus is going to portray to us at the ending of this book, which I think John's goal was as well, is for us to just believe and trust in Jesus, will help us. This image will help us to grow. So let's pray and dive into this message. Jesus, help us to see the image. Help us to know the image. Help us to live the image. I pray this in no other name but your name, Jesus. Amen. The 21st chapter starts off with Peter, this amazing person that we find all over the Gospels. Peter is important to understand this because Peter is the leader, I would say, one of the leaders of the packs. He is kind of the startup point of the church, what we see in the book of Acts. Peter is this really strong and vibrant disciple. But what we realize about Peter is that Peter was not always strong in faith. Peter reminds us about ourselves that although we think that who we are stronger in faith, we might not be, or we think we know more, we might not know. But God continues to just trust Peter with so much. And so we see now that after Jesus has died, Peter reverted back to his old ways of life, that way of fishing. Jesus found Peter fishing. He was a fisherman. And so when we see Peter going back fishing, we know that it's something that he knew. We knew that's something he did well, and he was dedicated to. And so it's not a surprise that Peter would go back to fishing and take some of the guys with him. But what we find is that it was a lack of understanding what was about to happen. Peter didn't really fully get it. He didn't think he understood that even after Jesus died, that this idea of him coming back was going to be a thing, a big thing at least. What we know from the passage in 21 is that Peter was with John, the disciple that Jesus loved. The Bible tells us that it was this disciple that kind of laid on Jesus' chest and was the one that Peter asked to ask Jesus who was going to betray him. So they knew the relationship that John had with Jesus, and Peter had a close relationship as well. Don't get me wrong. I mean, Peter was the one that would challenge Jesus when Jesus would say things, and Peter was the one that Jesus said, "Get behind me, Satan." But also was the one that Jesus reminded that is on the faith that he had, he would be this rock in which the church would be built up on. So as we understand all of this, we understand these two characters, John and Peter, who were just strong in faith disciples, close to Jesus. And they were the ones that Jesus would hold on to be pillars. John being one that Jesus left his mother with, and Peter being the one that he would build his church on. So what do we see here? Well, in the beginning of chapter 21, what we find is that as they were fishing, going back to do their things, Jesus had an interaction with them again. But what we find is that this is the similar interaction to what they had before with Jesus. You remember when Jesus first found them? I think we find this right in Luke 4, where Jesus kind of finds his disciples, and he comes to them, and he wants to. Oh, sorry, I said Luke 4, Luke 5, where he finds his disciples, and he calls them to be his own. It's the start of his ministry. And he told them to, cast your nets to the other side. And they did. And when they cast their nets to the other side, it was an overflow of fish that came. The nets were ripping. It was an amazing miracle for these fishermen. They would understand that, oh my gosh, what I just saw was a miracle, because they would understand the art of fishing. Now, I grew up on the island of the Bahamas, and there's a lot of fishing that happens there. I mean, my uncle is a fisherman, still is a fisherman, and so he would understand a grunt work of fisher work, like whatever that might be. But I wasn't too much into it. I didn't have a really good fishing experience until I was here in Gig Harbor. Mark Jones took me, Nathan Jones, his son, and Chris, his son-in-law, on a trip to deep sea fishing. I think it's actually Nathan that took us, actually Mark, me, and Chris, for Mark's birthday. And we went deep sea fishing and was able to catch a lot of fish. I mean, it was so much of these rockfish that we caught, and just, we throw it on and they share it throughout the whole boat. But then it was time to catch salmon, which is hard to catch, right? You throw your line up there and you're sitting down and you're waiting. But doing all of this, one thing that I really didn't know is how much someone can get seasick by being out in the ocean. I mean, the boat would go down and you would see nothing but water, but then the waves would come up and rise the boat up, and you'll see all these boats, and then you'll go down, and you just get so dizzy, you just don't know what's going on. And I could just imagine Peter being one of these guys who kind of knew the art. He reminds me of a Brian Bear or like a Mark Jones, who, when they're on the boat, they don't get as seasick as me or Chris did during this time. We're not used to fishing. We don't get it. But Brian does. Mark does. And Brian probably way more than Mark, as he is a boatman himself. Just all great knowing the boat and knowing these different things. So I picture Peter being something like that, knowing the art of fishing, knowing what it looks like. And so when a guy would come and tell him, cast your net on the other side, I mean, his response would have no choice but to rebuttal Jesus and say, we've been doing this for so long. Go ahead and put it on the other side. What Jesus said, and when they did that, they caught abundance of fish. Well, in 21, you see this exact same encounter that happens. But what we realize is that Jesus did this, said this, and then John, being the disciple he loves, recognized that this is Jesus. He recognized who it is that said this. And maybe it could be a playback of John recognizing, hey, look, he did this before. But what is amazing is that Jesus has proven himself, and he's showing them who he is by saying the same things. Church, I want to remind you that when we come to knowing Jesus and hearing the voice of Jesus and discerning the Spirit wouldn't do things contrary to himself. Jesus wouldn't give messages contrary to himself. Yet we see this consistency with Jesus that he tells them in faith to throw to the other side, and he provides for them. So as we come into trusting Jesus, one of the things that we must recognize that even if we think we know more than Jesus, maybe it's time to do the things that are not so common to us. Switch paths and actually trust in him to be able to provide in the paths that he has provided for us, that he's given us, that he's told us to do. I think this is the first kind of image we see of Jesus where he's consistent. That he consistently gives them this order so that they could recognize who he is. The purpose is that they will see Jesus in his risen glory. But the next thing that we see that happens later on in this text is this idea of Jesus asking Peter 3 times if he loves him. Now, if you've been around the church circle for a long time, you know that in the Greek language and in the culture, they have many different words for love. We know the agape love, which is this idea of loving people. We know the eros love, which is this love of romance, the love of sexual, of this love of just having this non-platonic relationship. And then it's the phila, I think it is. Oh, I'm getting this wrong. Phila love. It's this love that is for, and it's a love that is a friendship love. That's what it is. And then we know in the Greek culture, there's many different, up to I think 8 different loves that we don't see necessarily in our New Testament, but we see in other Greek languages, in other Greek writings, we pick up on some of these other things. But those are the 3 ones that we see primarily. And those ones are interesting because we need to understand those in order to understand the type of love we see in the New Testament. The first one that I want to mention is this actual eros love. Eros love. And this is this love that you have between spouses. And what is amazing about this type of love is that it's common to see this within only a relationship. So when the Bible talks about this love, we can put it primarily into this idea of being in a relationship with a person romantically. This is not the love that is talked about here when Jesus asks Peter, "Do you love me?" It's actually the love for other people. It's this love that is for others, for mass people. This is the one that Jesus is using when he asks Peter, "Do you love me?" It's actually a verb. It's an action word, calling Peter to actually do something in this love. But what we realize is that this when Peter responds to Jesus, it's not with the same word. He actually uses the friendship love word when he responds and said, "Yes, I love you." A friendship. Well, then Jesus asks a second time, "Do you love me?" And he uses that word again about loving others. And Peter responds again with the friendship love. "Yes, I do love you. That's what I said, Jesus." But Jesus asks a third time. This time he uses the friendship love. Although it's still an action, he uses it again. And Peter, being Peter and probably feeling a little bit down, as Jesus asks this third time, answers again, "Lord, did you know that I love you?" And we see this act of Jesus saying these words, "Feed my sheep." Now, what I want you to pick up on here before I touch on a little bit of that ending section is this. Jesus asks Peter 3 times, "Do you love me?" Do you remember how Peter denied Jesus? The people that were against Jesus at the time asked Peter if he knew Jesus 3 times. And Peter said, "I don't," 3 times. Peter denied Jesus, even though Jesus told Peter that he would deny him. Peter did so and recognized what he did. And then after that, he went back fishing. I guess reverting back to what he knew. But it's amazing that Jesus then again comes and gives Peter this second chance to ask the question, "Do you love me?" And he gives the answer then, "If you do love me, to feed my sheep." Peter was given this opportunity to now take on the mantle of being a disciple, whatever that may look like. And the discipling action here is to love through feeding Jesus' sheep. Well, Jesus asking Peter if you love him, using the word that kind of means this love for for the people, for community, for others. It's interesting for us to understand because Jesus is calling Peter to love him by loving people. When we find Peter's response is like, "Yeah, I'm your friend, I love you," he asks him again. And he said, "Yeah, I love you, you're my friend. I mean, you're here with me, Jesus." But then Jesus responds to Peter in that friendship love. And I think what we see here is that when Jesus responds in this friendship love, he's saying, "Well, you're my friend. I want you to love other people by loving me, and you're my friend, so do so. Do it, Peter. Love my sheep. Tend to my sheep. Take care of the people that I'm leaving to you." And you could say here that Peter really understood the call that was placed upon his life to start the church in which would be believers, the sheep of God that would be called to live a life worthy of the calling that Jesus has called each and every one of us to. I like the way that Martin Luther puts it as he calls us to be in the priesthood, every single believer. That it's not that pastors or people like Peter who are shepherds and leaders in the church are higher than others. And no, it's not that at all. What it is that we're all called to be in this priesthood together as believers. And so Jesus understood this and wanted this to be true. And I think Luther got it right here, where he's calling Peter to tend to the sheep, knowing that all the sheep would come together to be on mission to share the truth of the gospel, to be this image in which people will see the true and living Jesus. And it all happens over these encounters. Like we see throughout the whole book of John, Jesus saw it fit to have relationship with people. He saw it fit to be on mission by practically doing things to show himself. I heard one of the greatest missionary advice that I could ever hear. And I say that this is great because of this. I understand that sharing the gospel is important, but I realize that sharing the gospel is for today and it's practical. That we are called as believers to help people in their physical needs as well as their spiritual needs. And one of the ways that Jesus did that is to reach out and help people with their physical needs to show his glory. He would heal people in order to show that he's the Lord so that they can see and have faith in Jesus. So as the church, as we're called to feed the sheep, as we're called to be the priesthood of the church, we're called to be ones in which we are willing to be the hands and feet of Jesus, helping people with their needs as we help them by giving them the gospel. And this is no surprise to you, One Hope Church, because you have done this so many times. You're consistently finding ways that you could help the needs of people, show them the gospel of Jesus. But I would want to put all of us in a challenge as we think of this. As we think about seeing Jesus come back and do this consistency, and then to see him ask Peter 3 times if he loves him, but then to tell him to feed the sheep. What are ways that we can feed the sheep? What are ways in which we can be authentically able to go out there and feed the sheep of Jesus? See, this question can't be answered right now sitting here, as we might have to think about that. We might have to think about it in depth for us to understand feeding the sheep. It might look different for each and every one of us. We all are called because we love Jesus to feed his sheep. I like how this gospel kind of wraps up. John wraps up the gospel by saying that Jesus did many things that are not even recorded in this book. And it goes back to the action of Jesus doing things again. See, on one end, we understand that salvation has nothing to do with the works that we have done, that we're saved by faith in Jesus Christ alone. And there's nothing that we can do to earn that at all. It's imparted on us because we are believers in Jesus and Jesus alone, and it's because of his work why we have salvation. But at the same time, I do think that we're called, now that we are believers in Jesus Christ, we do have works that come with that. And the work is not because of our salvation. The work is because we love the Lord. You see how it turns around here? See, it had nothing to do, really, this action of love that Jesus is talking to Peter has. That has nothing to do with if Peter is a believer or not. Though some arguments might be placed for that, and some people do that, and they're like, well, if Peter is not doing these things, then he's not a believer. I don't think that that's what the case is. The case has to do with us doing the work of the Lord because we love him. We don't do work for prideful gain. At least we shouldn't do work for prideful gain, but we should do work because we love the Lord. It's because we love people, and we love him through loving people, and we love him because he's him. And like the last love, we love it because we understand that we are his friends. So I would encourage us as we continue to press on. Going out to the fall, you're about to start your fall time, and where you'll be in church every Sunday. And it's a good time to launch and connect with people again. One of the things that we can do is we can work because we love God. Whether that's doing work outside of the church or inside of the church, where it's that growing as life groups, growing as groups doing life together. Whereas growing in marriages or growing with our families, whether that be distant families or our children, whatever that may look like, that might be taking the time to do work on our own selves and our relationship with the Lord. Whatever it might look like for you coming this fall, I would encourage you to think about the questions. Do you love Jesus? Do you love him? Do you love people? Do you love him in a friendship love? Well, do the work of Jesus and do it because you love him and for no reason other than that. Be blessed.